Hit and Run, a short story by Noelle Dubay. She came into Lehman's around 2, glassy-eyed, not looking for anything in particular. There were other customers in the store, so I didn't bother asking if she needed help. Plus, Mr. Lehman wasn't around, so I didn't have to put on the facade of service industry friendliness. I'm very much of the opinion that people are capable for asking for help when they need it, and don't need to be patronized by some self-loathing grocery store cashier with nothing better to do. Can I interest you in our mediocre selection of sandwich breads? No? Well, I'll be over here if you should ever realize you're incapable of selecting a condiment independently. Anyway, I didn't talk to her, and she didn't even look my way. The store was small enough that I could see nearly all the customers at once, except in the back right corner by the freezers. Mr. Lehman had installed one of those overhead fisheye sort of mirrors so we could catch those scummy, shoplifting teenagers, but the town was small enough that I already knew who to look out for, and none of them were likely to come in on a Tuesday afternoon. For some reason, though, I felt like I should be watching this woman. I didn't know why. She didn't look familiar, too old to be in any of my university classes, a little over middle-aged, 2 grown kids, some receptionist job in a sales office, I guessed. Her hair was styled into what I like to call the mom puff, wisps, hair sprayed nearly vertically, topped off with a delicate blow-dried curl. She had on those blocky plastic sunglasses that old people wear over their bifocals. She picked up a basket and made her way to the left side of the store, browsing absent-mindedly through the bargain shelf of damaged goods. I gave up trying to place her and let my mind wander, which I probably shouldn't have done, since Mr. Lehman had gotten upset at me the day before for not paying attention to customers. Mr. Lehman is never content with anyone, though. If he had ever met my roommate, he probably would have categorized him into the scummy teen demographic, even though Andrew was 22 and about to graduate with an English degree. He was a pretty nice guy, but he still lived in the dorms, and he probably hadn't bought a new item of clothing since high school. He was a couple years older than me, and we didn't have much in common, so we didn't talk very often. He'd comment on whatever book he was reading every once in a while. I'd whine about my job. But for a while, he would either give me a ride or let me borrow his old car to get to work. I'd totaled my car on a patch of black ice that winter, and Lehman's was a couple miles out of town. I wasn't going to ride bike if I didn't have to, even though my dad was always so quick to tell me I could use the workout. I turned to look at the parking lot through the window behind the register. It was starting to rain, little drops tapping against the glass and bouncing off the hoods of the cars parked along the building. One of the cars had a damaged front bumper with a cracked headlight on the right side. An old green sedan with a cowboy hat on the end of the antenna. That's the sign of a real weirdo, Andrew had told me once as he drove to work. What kind of person would want to ruin a perfectly good car by sticking some foam cat head on the antenna? I agreed with him. That was one of the few points of commonality between us. The woman had made her way to the middle aisle before I remembered where I had seen that particular stupid cowboy hat before. The thing was, I had been borrowing Andrew's car, until in an impatient rage I pulled onto St. Paul and into oncoming traffic, smashing into an old green sedan in the meantime. One of the more recent screw-ups of my life was driving very quickly away from that sedan and the wide-eyed woman inside it. The same woman who was in the pasta aisle now, picking up boxes of spaghetti and reading the back labels. She took her sunglasses off and pushed them into the mom puff, and then she looked up towards me, box of rigatoni balanced in her hand. I looked away from her glance. Initially, it wasn't clear she'd recognized me. I was wearing my work shirt, and I had a Lehman's cap on. I had had a beard at the time of the accident, but Mr. Lehman made me shave it off because it wasn't professional. I decided I was disguised enough to bear my face, but when I lifted my cap back up, I couldn't find her. There was a girl from my psych class by the cereal, and a man in produce squeezing pears, but old green sedan was nowhere to be found. I felt simultaneously relieved and nervous that I was feeling relief. My dad always used to drill into my head that caution was healthy. Relief was a sign of vulnerability. Then he'd say something in Latin, semper paratus, something like that, and leave me feeling like he was planning an attack. There was a movement in the back corner coming from the fisheye. There she was. From the front counter, she looked like a huge puff of hair with these spindly, tapered legs sticking out of it, reaching into the freezer for some juice concentrate. The spindly legs were covered in faded black jeans, and with the old teal windbreaker she had on, her outfit, I realized, seemed almost sinister. Why should this woman choose such pathetic articles of clothing to wear today, if not just to increase the growing amount of nausea and guilt I already felt for driving away? I used to think about this frog I learned about in 8th grade bio a lot. If it ate something bad or got sick, it could regurgitate its entire stomach out of its body and scrape off whatever was inside and then shove its stomach back in. Sometimes I wish I could do the same with my brain. Spit it out and pick off the moments I don't want to remember or the feelings I don't want to be having. As old green sedan shut the freezer door, I imagined scraping off the whole memory of that awful crash and all the guilt that came with it. And while I was at it, I'd scrape off the image of Andrew's stupid, sad face when he saw his wrecked car, and Mr. Lehman shouting at me for having a stupid beard, and my dad's voicemail telling me how disappointed he was that all I seemed to be good at was wrecking cars. The woman turned the corner, basket first, erupting from the fisheye bubble and into full human form. Her arm sagged from the weight of the groceries. She was ready to check out, and I began to sense unquestioningly that she knew who I was. As she shuffled towards the register, she looked up into my eyes and smiled a murderer's smile, full of righteous vigor. "Hello," she mumbled. She placed her items onto the counter, obviously acutely calculated to be the saddest bunch of groceries on earth. A dented can of peaches, generic toothpaste, a box of ginger snaps, toilet paper, frozen juice concentrate. Clearly, people who put foam cowboy hats on the antennas of their cars are not only weirdos, but also geniuses. Only a guilt-tripping mastermind could buy a dented can of peaches, wearing faded black denim from the guy who smashed her car a week ago. I nearly puked from the combination of shame and abject fear. I considered running. The last thing I wanted was a confrontation, especially one that could be so easily avoided. But if I left the store, Mr. Lehman would probably fire me. If I lost my job, then first of all, my dad would be pissed, and second of all, I wouldn't be able to pay Andrew back. Even though he hadn't asked for the money, I could tell he was upset and wanted me to pay him for the damages, and since this was my only source of income, I didn't have much of a choice. I stood my ground. Semper paratus, right? I rang up her order quickly, hands shaking, and pointed to the screen above the register for the order total. The situation was entirely in her hands. "Do you take checks?" "Do I take checks?" I nodded, swallowing loudly. If I were to sit down and actually try, I could not come up with anything sadder than a middle-aged woman in faded black denim paying for canned peaches with a check, with Tweety Bird on it. She paid for the Tweety Bird option. She had obviously crafted the most guilt-inducing scenario possible and was relishing every second of my nauseating remorse. She smiled as she ripped off the check and handed it to me. "There. I hope that's not your bike out there. Looks like a bit of rain." I couldn't take it anymore. I leaned over the counter. "Listen, lady, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I was in a hurry, and it wasn't my car, and I just didn't have the money to deal with an accident. I get it. I'm a monster. You don't have to tell me. Just take your groceries and please go." I began to sweat, but my hands had at last stopped shaking. She looked startled, her eyes wide like they were on St. Paul, but then her face relaxed into calmness. "Oh, that was you? Oh, honey, that old car has seen far worse days." She placed her hand on mine. "Don't you worry about me. All is forgiven. I'm glad you're all right." She took her bags, waved, and headed towards the door. In the parking lot, she opened the back door of her sedan and put the plastic bag into the back seat. She sat in the front, searched for her keys, started the car. As she backed away, I realized my sweat had grown cold. When I turned around, I noticed the dented can of peaches, still sitting on the edge of the counter. "Thanks,"